I need to tell you about two adoption stories. Mine and someone else's. They both ended with the truth, but only one of us got the fantasy. The other got a nightmare. And I can't stop thinking about how easily our stories could have been reversed. I'm 57 now. For my entire life, all 57 years, I'd been told this ridiculous fairy tale about where I came from. My adoptive parents meant well, I think. They spun me this magical origin story that even as a kid, I knew was bullshit. You know how children have that weird ability to sense when adults are lying? Not maliciously, but lying nonetheless? That was my entire childhood. A beautiful lie wrapped in good intentions, and I just accepted it. What else could I do? The story they told me involved a princess and a tragedy. Some vague romantic notion that my birth parents were these glamorous people who loved me so much they gave me up so I could have a better life. Even at 7 years old, sitting at the dinner table while my adoptive mother wove this tale with tears in her eyes, I knew something was off. The details never quite lined up. The story changed slightly each time it was told, like they were improvising, adding flourishes, trying to make it more believable or perhaps more bearable. I remember asking questions that made them uncomfortable. But why couldn't they just keep me and give me a better life themselves? My father would clear his throat and change the subject. If they loved me so much, why haven't they ever tried to find me? My mother would get this pained expression and tell me that some questions didn't have easy answers. They weren't bad parents. I want to make that clear. They fed me, clothed me, sent me to music lessons when they noticed I had talent, came to every single one of my recitals and performances. They loved me in the way people love a child they desperately wanted but couldn't have on their own. But there was always this wall between us. This unspoken territory we couldn't cross, built out of secrets and half-truths, and the story they convinced themselves was kinder than reality. The truth stayed buried for decades. And honestly, I wasn't in a rush to dig it up for most of my life. I had a career in music, nothing spectacular, but solid. Session work, some touring with bands you've probably never heard of, teaching on the side when gigs were slow. I got married, got divorced, got married again. Had relationships that worked until they didn't. The usual human experience of stumbling through life, making choices, living with consequences. The adoption thing was just this background hum, this question mark that occasionally got louder in my head at 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep, but mostly stayed quiet. I think about it sometimes when I looked in the mirror and couldn't see any resemblance to the people who raised me. I'd wonder about it when medical forms asked for family history and I'd have to write unknown in every blank space. But it never felt urgent. I had a life. I existed. Wasn't that enough? But then you hit a certain age, right? Mortality starts tapping you on the shoulder. My adoptive father died when I was 53, heart attack, quick and brutal. My adoptive mother followed 2 years later, cancer that spread faster than anyone expected. And suddenly I was orphaned for the second time in my life, standing at funerals for people who loved me but never quite told me the truth. After my mother's funeral, I was cleaning out her house. You know that terrible task of sorting through someone's entire existence, deciding what to keep and what to throw away, and I found a locked box in the back of her closet. It wasn't hidden exactly, but it wasn't displayed either. Just sitting there among old photo albums and Christmas decorations. This small metal box with a combination lock. I don't know what made me try my birthday as the combination. Maybe it was obvious. Maybe I was just desperate for some kind of connection. But the lock clicked open, and inside was everything. My original birth certificate with names that meant nothing to me. Adoption papers with signatures and legal stamps. Letters. Dozens of letters. From agencies, lawyers, people whose handwriting I didn't recognize. And photographs. 2 young people, barely adults, staring at the camera with that particular expression of people who know their world is about to change forever. Him with dark curly hair and intense eyes. Her with a soft smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Blonde hair pulled back, wearing what looked like a school uniform. That's when the urgency hit. That's when the 3 a.m. wondering became a daytime obsession. I was 55 years old, holding pictures of strangers who made me, and I realized I was running out of time to know them. So at 57, I finally searched. The process was easier than I expected and harder than I imagined. DNA tests that promise connections and delivered overwhelming amounts of data. Ancestry websites where you upload your genetic information and suddenly you're related to 10,000 people you've never met. Private investigators who specialize in closed adoptions, who know how to navigate sealed records and bureaucratic red tape. Took 8 months. 8 months of following leads, hitting dead ends, making phone calls to distant relatives who had no idea I existed. 8 months of my heart jumping every time my phone rang, hoping it was news, terrified it would be bad news. What I found was better than the fairy tale because it was real. My biological parents were young, mid-1960s young, which meant they were caught between the world that was dying and the world that hadn't quite been born yet. He was Jewish, very seriously Jewish, the kind where family and faith and tradition aren't just important, they're everything. His family had survived things that most American families couldn't even imagine, had come to this country with trauma embedded in their DNA and religion as their anchor. She was Baptist, equally committed, equally devoted to a God that demanded certain things of her life. Southern Baptist, the kind where you go to church 3 times a week and the congregation is your extended family and straying from the path means risking everything you know. They met in college. Some state school where kids from different worlds collided and sometimes, against all odds, connected. They had a literature class together, or maybe it was philosophy, the details get fuzzy in the retellings I got from relatives. But they talked after class, started studying together, started taking walks together, started falling in love despite every single reason they shouldn't. You have to understand what that meant in 1965. We think we're so evolved now, so beyond all that tribalism, but back then, Jewish people weren't even considered white by a huge portion of America. There were still sundown towns where Jews weren't welcome, still country clubs that wouldn't accept Jewish members, still quotas at universities limiting how many Jewish students could attend. Her family looked at this young man who loved their daughter and saw something unacceptable, something that would ruin her life, ruin their standing in the community, ruin everything they'd built. They saw their daughter throwing away her salvation, her chance at a good Christian life, for some boy who didn't accept Jesus Christ as his savior. His family wasn't much better. They saw him betraying his heritage, his people, everything their family had fought to preserve. They saw him risking excommunication from the community that had sustained them through persecution and genocide. They saw him choosing a girl over his birthright. The families tried to break them up, forbade them from seeing each other, threatened consequences. But young love doesn't listen to threats, does it? They kept meeting in secret, kept planning some impossible future where their families would eventually accept them, where love would triumph over tradition. And then she got pregnant with me. I try to imagine that moment sometimes. The missed period, the drugstore test, the confirmation that changes everything. Were they scared? Excited? Both? Did they think maybe this would force their family's hands, make them accept the inevitable? Or did they already know it was over? When she told her parents, they did what families did back then to daughters who got pregnant outside of marriage. They disappeared her. Homes for wayward girls, God. Even the term makes my skin crawl. Like pregnancy was some kind of moral deviation that needed to be hidden away, corrected, scrubbed clean before you could rejoin polite society. These places existed all over the country, usually run by churches, supposedly charitable institutions that were really just warehouses for shame. She was shipped off to one in another state, far enough away that none of her parents' friends or church congregation would know what happened. Far enough away that she could give birth in secret, give up the baby, and return home as if nothing had happened. As if she could just rewind her life and pretend I never existed. The conditions in those places, I've read about them since, done research into what my mother experienced. The girls were treated like criminals or mental patients, stripped of their identities, given numbers instead of names, forced to do manual labor as penance for their sin. They were fed basic food, given minimal medical care, kept isolated from the outside world. And through it all, they were counseled constantly, relentlessly, about the nobility of giving up their babies, about how selfish it would be to keep a child they couldn't properly care for, about how adoption was the loving choice. Psychological warfare dressed up as Christian charity. But here's the part that breaks my heart and puts it back together at the same time. He followed her. This Jewish kid, probably 21 or 22 years old, defied his family and traveled across state lines to this home for unwed mothers. He found out where they'd sent her. I don't know how, maybe she managed to get a letter to him, and he went there, showed up at this Baptist-run institution and demanded to see her. They wouldn't let him in at first. He wasn't family. He wasn't listed as the father on any paperwork. He was, in their eyes, probably the boy who'd led their girl astray in the first place. But he kept coming back. Day after day, showing up, arguing with whoever was at the front desk, refusing to leave until they let him see her. Eventually, they did. Maybe they got tired of him. Maybe someone took pity. Maybe she threatened to cause a scene if they didn't let him visit. But he got in and he begged her to keep me. Begged her to leave with him right then, to hell with both their families. He'd marry her. They'd figure it out. He'd work 2 jobs, 3 jobs, whatever it took. They'd raise me together, build a life, make it work somehow. I found this out from one of his relatives, a cousin who remembered the family drama. She told me that his parents were furious, terrified, desperate. Their son was throwing away his future for a Gentile girl and a baby born out of wedlock. They threatened to sit Shiva for him, to declare him dead to the family. They begged him to come home, to let the baby be adopted, to marry a nice Jewish girl and forget this ever happened. He refused. He wanted us. He wanted to be a family. But she said no. I don't blame her. How could I? She was young, scared, alone in a horrible place, with people whispering in her ear constantly about damnation and duty and doing the right thing. Her family had made it clear they'd disown her if she married him. His family was saying the same thing to him. And she was devout, truly believed in her faith, in the God who required certain things of her. She couldn't convert to Judaism. It would mean abandoning her salvation, everything she'd been taught since childhood. And he couldn't convert to Christianity. It would mean betraying his heritage, his people, his ancestors who died rather than renounce their faith. The math didn't work. Love wasn't enough, not when it was crushed between the weight of 2 immovable faiths, 2 sets of parents who couldn't see past their own certainties, 2 young people who wanted to do right by their families and their God and each other but couldn't figure out how to do all 3. So they gave me up. I imagine that moment sometimes. The paperwork, the signatures, 2 people who loved each other, giving away their child because the world couldn't bend enough to let them keep me. Did they hold me first? Did they give me a name that no one remembers? Did my father cry? Did my mother? Did they make promises to find me someday? Promises they knew they probably couldn't keep? According to the records I found, my father was present at my birth. That was unusual for the time, especially in one of those homes. But he insisted, and somehow he made it happen. He was there when I entered the world. He held me. There's a note in the file from a social worker describing him as distraught and refusing to leave the infant. They had to eventually force him to give me to the nurse, had to pry me out of his arms. And then he left and I never saw him again. My mother stayed for 6 weeks after the birth. That was protocol, making sure she recovered physically, making sure she was properly counseled about her choice, making sure she wasn't going to change her mind and cause legal complications. Then she went home, back to her family, back to her church, back to pretending I never happened. They never saw each other again either. Both families made sure of that. He graduated college and was immediately set up with a nice Jewish girl by his parents. Married within a year, trying to prove he was back on the right path. She went back to school, eventually married a man from her church, someone her parents approved of. They both built new lives on top of the ruins of what they'd wanted. I'll never know some of those answers. My mother died a year before I started searching. 1 year. I missed her by 1 fucking year. And that's something I'll carry forever. The investigator I hired found her obituary while tracking down leads. Died of a stroke, sudden and unexpected. Survived by her husband of 30 years, her 3 children, her church community. The obituary mentioned she loved gardening and volunteered at the local library. Painted a picture of a normal, happy life. I wonder if she thought about me, if my birthday was hard for her every year, if she looked at her other children and saw echoes of the one she gave away, if she regretted it or if she made peace with it, or if she buried it so deep she could pretend it never happened. I'll never know. Almost made it. Almost got to ask her everything I wanted to know. Almost got to tell her I understood, that I didn't blame her, that I turned out okay. Almost got to see if I had her eyes or her smile or her way of tilting my head when I'm thinking. Almost. My father is still alive, but he wants nothing to do with me. I found him through a cousin who was willing to talk to me, who helped me understand the family dynamics and the history. She offered to reach out to him on my behalf, to let him know I was searching, to see if he'd be willing to meet. His response came back through her. I'm sorry, but that door is closed. I wish him well, but I can't go back there. Please respect my privacy. And you know what? I respect that. I really do. He's an old man now, nearly 80, and maybe opening that door would bring back too much pain. Maybe he has a family who doesn't know about me. A wife who never knew about that year of his life. Children who would be devastated to learn they have a half-brother. Maybe the guilt and grief of giving me up is something he carefully buried 60 years ago, and digging it back up would destroy him. He gave me something when I was born. Not his presence, but his love, even if it was only for a moment. He fought for me even though he lost. He held me when I was born. He refused to let go until they made him. That matters. That's enough. I don't need to disrupt his life now. I don't need to force closure for myself at the expense of his peace. The fact that he loved me once, that he tried, that he wanted me, that's more than a lot of adoptees get. I can live with that. What I did get was 3 half-siblings. My mother had 3 other children after me with her husband, 2 daughters and a son. When the investigator found them and explained the situation, that their mother had a child before she married their father, that I was searching, that I hoped to make contact, they were shocked. Completely blindsided. Their mother had never told them. Took the secret to her grave. But after the initial shock wore off, they wanted to meet me. We arranged a meeting at a neutral location, a coffee shop in the city where 2 of them lived. I remember walking in and scanning the room, trying to figure out which people were my siblings. And then I saw them, 3 people sitting together at a corner table, all of them turning to look at me at the same time, and it was like looking into a genetic mirror. The youngest daughter has my nose. The son has my exact same hands, long fingers, same proportions, same way of gesturing when we talk. The older daughter has my mother's smile, which means it's my smile too, and seeing it on someone else's face was surreal and wonderful and heartbreaking all at once. We talked for 5 hours that first meeting. Closed down the coffee shop and moved to a bar, then to someone's apartment, just talking and talking and talking, comparing stories, filling in gaps, figuring out how we fit together. And here's where it gets weird and wonderful. We're all musicians. All 4 of us, professionally or semi-professionally. I'm talking real talent, not just I took guitar lessons once bullshit. I've been a professional musician for 30 years. Guitar, piano, bass. When I found my biological siblings, it turned out all 3 of them were musicians too. A symphony violinist, a jazz vocalist with 2 albums, and a session drummer who's played on records you've heard. None of our parents were musicians, adoptive or biological. Somehow it still ran straight through us. We've played together now. Written together. Locked in instantly. Same habits, same humor, same physical tells when we listen to music. After 57 years of not knowing where anything in me came from, I suddenly had a genetic map that explained everything. They told me about our mother, kind, strict, religious but not cruel. She sang in the church choir, loved gardening, was afraid of change. When they asked if I was angry she gave me up, I told them no. She was 20, scared, and had no good options. She gave me life and gave me to people who wanted me. That's not something I can resent. We talk all the time now. We're planning to record together. I got the good ending, the best version of a painful story. I found belonging, history, peace. But there's another story. My adopted sister, also adopted, 7 years older, struggled far more with not knowing where she came from. While I could live with the questions, they haunted her. After hearing about my reunion, she decided to search too. It took 6 months to find her biological mother. Her mother had been institutionalized since birth, nearly 65 years in the same hospital. Profoundly disabled, wheelchair-bound, cognitively like a young child. She'd never lived outside medical care, never had a life. When my sister visited, there was no recognition, no connection, just confusion and fear. And then the rest came out. During her mother's decades in the institution, an orderly raped her. Someone paid to protect her. Someone who knew she couldn't consent or report it. She became pregnant. No one noticed in time. An investigation went nowhere. No one was held accountable. My sister was born and immediately put up for adoption. Her mother likely never understood what happened, or forgot it entirely. My sister told me afterward, in a flat voice, "I thought knowing would be better than not knowing. I didn't think it could be worse. It was worse. She's in therapy. She has a life. But she lives with the knowledge that her existence came from violence, that her origins are inseparable from cruelty. Sometimes she wishes she'd never searched. That's what haunts me. The contrast. We were adopted into the same family. We searched at similar points in our lives. I found love and meaning. She found horror. The difference was pure luck. Adoption stories love happy reunions. They don't talk enough about the searches that destroy people. You don't get to choose what's behind the door. You just open it and hope you can live with what you find. I found peace. She found trauma. And all of it came down to chance.